Good morning, Moms of Master Books. Hope you're having a fantastic week. Today, I am joined by Miss Kristen Pratt, who is my wife, the mother of my children.
You're drawing a blank already?
Yep. She is a curriculum development editor here at Master Books, and she is also the author of the Language Lessons for a Living Education series. So we're going to talk about the series today. We're going to talk about level 4 and what's in it. So let me be sure, if you're joining us, to comment for a chance to have 2,500 reward points added to your account. It's kind of fun. This morning we added $75 worth of reward points to various posts, catching up a little bit on last week's video and whatnot, but that's pretty cool. So, okay, Language Lessons for a Living Education series. I've heard it said that one of your primary motivations, besides serving the fantastic market that we do, in volunteering to write this, was because for over 20 years of homeschooling your 9 children, for helping countless moms through their seasons of homeschooling, and working with a lot of different programs, you haven't found one that you liked. And
Correct.
So the idea was to take everything you've learned, everything you've worked with that worked, knowing what didn't work, cutting that out, and writing a curriculum that met the needs of real-world homeschooling. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I have found that programs either focus so much on grammar and not at all on writing, or all on writing and nothing on the grammar component. And so what I've always desired is to have a program that does a little bit of both, without going overboard for either one. Because my experience is the majority of kids really struggle with language arts. You have those that are just good at it.
Okay.
And so it doesn't matter what you give to them. No matter what you give to them, they're just going to run with it. And so we call those here the sparklers. And so most of my kids have not been the sparklers. They've just been average students, in language arts.
So you were like a sparkler, and I was more like the dim.
No, that's not as what I said.
Okay.
So what I wanted to develop is something that teaches the nuts and bolts of the English language, but make it so that it's doable for all children, and to develop not necessarily, they don't have to be wanting to write the next novel,
Mm-hmm.
but to actually be able to enjoy a little bit of writing. Because writing is nothing more than expressing yourself and sharing your ideas. And every kid wants to express themselves and to share their ideas. And so what I want to do is I want to give them the tools that they're able to do that and not be in tears because we've just drilled grammar so much, or we've have them writing a 10-page thesis in kindergarten. Okay, that's an exaggeration, but that's how it feels to a kid that's presented with a lot of intense writing that they're not developmentally ready for.
Mm-hmm.
And so I struggled to find programs that really struck that balance well. There's a lot of good programs out there that got certain things right in terms of what I was looking for, but it seems like I was always having to pull in pieces, the grammar piece from here, the writing piece from there. And so what I really wanted was to develop a program that did this, that work together, that the grammar and the writing are actually applied instead of learned as two separate camps. And so that's why you'll frequently see where they're writing a sentence using an adjective. If we're discussing adjectives, they're applying the things that they're learning into their writing.
Okay.
It's also why you you don't see them developing these huge papers in third grade because they're still getting the nuts and bolts down. I mean, it didn't matter what program I used with my kids. It still seemed like fifth grade, they're still being reminded, did you start your sentence with a capital letter? Did you end it with punctuation? This is a run-on sentence. You know, they're still developing the ability to write a really good paragraph. And I believe that it's essential that they know how to write a really good paragraph before they can move on and start writing papers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really what this whole entire course is focusing on. It's starting off first developing the ability to write a good sentence. And then we're moving into writing a really good paragraph. And in the process, they're learning about grammar. They're learning about creative writing. They're learning about the mechanics and the structure of a good paragraph, avoiding the run-on sentences, you know, that sort of thing. Really able to communicate their thoughts, their stories, their ideas in a well-written paragraph before we jump into writing papers on things.
Okay.
And that's something that I have felt wasn't out there.
Mm-hmm.
I have felt that a lot of it is very intense in the grammar without the application, or the application is this other course that's completely devoid of the grammar and too much too fast, which leaves the kids, either we skip it, they do a really lousy job at it, or they're just crying because it's overwhelming to them.
Right.
And so I really wanted to focus on really nailing those basics before all this other is expected of them, because there's plenty of time in high school for them to learn how to write longer papers really well.
So I have a comment about this.
You can make your
We
comment.
frequently don't agree on things. That's what makes us unique. Most couples agree on everything. We agree on a few things.
Very few things.
Okay. So you say you focus on the basics, and you say you focus on writing good sentences and good paragraphs.
Right.
Okay. So I have had the opportunity to manage. At one time, I managed 60 jobs with 10 different crews, worth millions of dollars at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Not once in all those years did I write a paper. I communicated through sentences and paragraphs.
Yes.
My life right now is an email box. If I owe you an email, I'm sorry. It's an email box where I'm communicating in sentences and paragraphs. And my word choices in those sentences and paragraphs have been worth millions of dollars when something bad has happened, or presenting ideas. This idea that we're supposed to learn to write a paper is about the most stupid thing, because only time I wrote papers was for professors. Never in life have I done that. Now, other people may have a different experience, and if you're a research scientist or stuff like that, where you actually are doing it different, that's probably different. But for most people, we communicate through sentences and paragraphs, not through introductory. Like in my email, I don't have an introductory paragraph, 3 supporting paragraphs, and a conclusion. If I did, my emails would never be written. So I think what you're talking about in learning, yes, well, they never be written for sure. If we're talking about teaching our kids how to use good words, mm-hmm. and build solid sentences and think and complete a thought, which I think is the strength of this series.
That's another thing that we need to discuss here, but back to the type of writing. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely correct, which is why in high school, I mean, I think that kids do need to know how to write a paper. I'm not opposed to kids learning how to write a paper. I just think that the proper place for that is for a much older student, not for the elementary levels. Yes. Because my kids, the papers sometimes that they put together where they're expected to write longer papers are really just not that great because they've been pushed too fast into doing it by their curriculum. And so we're still trying to put together a cohesive paragraph that makes sense. And then they're writing papers that have all these incohesive paragraphs, and they're still not capitalizing their sentences.
Mhm.
And so the first word of their sentences. And so I don't want that for my kids. I want them to focus on being able to, what they do write, they're writing well.
Mhm.
And so that's more of my focus in this whole entire series than it is, okay, when your kid is done, they're writing these magnificent papers, because it's about communication. And like you said, in the real world, the communication is not in the form of papers. Do they need to know how to write them by the time they hit college? Absolutely. Well, if they're going to college, they need to know how to write a paper. That's important. I do think that it's important that they know how to provide sources for their information, where they got their information, no matter what kind of writing that they're doing. There are some things like that, some technical aspect that's important. But a lot of that can be addressed in high school. It doesn't have to be addressed in the elementary.
Yes.
That train ends up so far down the tracks and the kid is left behind. They fell out somewhere along the way.
If you can communicate your ideas effectively,
yes,
in a way that people understand them, you will succeed. In college, professors have different flavors.
yes.
So some professors want you to write it according to a format. Others want you to be more creative. I mean, there's, there, like, I see all this emphasis on writing, and it's all designed towards writing a college paper. And yet you do that in college, but you never do it anytime beyond life.
Well, this is a good point too, is you might teach your kid this wonderful way to write a paper, and they may get to college and the professor has a whole different way, a whole different system, and they're going to teach your kid exactly how they want their papers presented.
Right.
So yeah, I mean,
so as long as you can communicate the ideas,
yes,
you can structure it to fit the format that they want. Even on the ACT test, we know that they scored that they suddenly became against the format essay.
Well, not everybody, but
some scorers did.
Some scorers did.
And so they were actually marking students off that used a formulaic approach to writing.
Right.
But if you can write good ideas, that's my point.
Yes.
So, and that's good. I think you've done really well with that.
So I'd like to circle back a little bit to talk about the premise and some of the things that are built in. Okay, so before a student can write, they actually have to have things in their head, and they have to be able to communicate those things that are in their head. And so some of the things...
I'll zoom down. Are you going to go through each book?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm going to talk about the series as a whole. I'll jump in the middle. How about we'll do that? We'll jump in at level 3. But they all have some things in here that you might say, well, that's really nice. But you might not completely understand the whys behind it. So I'm just trying to find this one feature that is included, the picture studies. Okay, so we have a picture study. And picture study is a Charlotte Mason technique, and that's all well and good, but how does this apply to language arts? And so the reason that I included the picture study in our language arts courses is because picture study exposes children to a different way of viewing the world and the way that the brain is interacting with the picture studies.
It engages different parts of the brain.
Yes. And so when they're looking at this image, not only are they recalling the story that goes with the image, but they're studying the details that are found within the image itself. And so we want them to hone in on some of those details so that later when they're telling a story that they remember that details are important.
Mhm.
And so color, expression, how things made them feel. We want them to be able to think about those things so that when they're telling a story, they're actually painting a picture with their words. Well, what is special about a picture? And if you never study pictures, you never understand that you're painting a picture with your words or how to do that. And so by getting students to study the pictures, we're actually filling their minds with images that they can later draw on as they're telling a story.
Because the brain works on pattern recognition.
Yes.
So we see a pattern and then we can make content relatable. We have a context.
Yes.
So by helping train them to be able to communicate ideas based on patterns is
Right.
actually pretty intelligent, pretty profound.
The other thing that you'll notice when you're going through, levels within each book and also across the series. So we have that particular kind of picture study, but we didn't keep, here's another picture study. Now this one has darker colors and is painted a little bit from a different time period. And then you'll see more modern looking images as well that they're going to study. And that's because I didn't want them to only have exposure to one type of style, artistic style, because there's no one kind of writing style.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted them to have a broad brush. Like there's the one with, I'm not sure which level. I've written a lot of levels and we had the flu last week, so I'm still not 100%. But one of them, I'm not sure if it's 3 or 4, we have the mouse.
Yes.
And that would be more of a brighter, more cartoony kind of style. And so that style is also woven through. So we have a nice blending of old and modern, so that the kids can anchor to a wide variety of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to draw from in their mind. And so that's one of the tools that we use. Another one of the tools, and some kids don't love to draw, and some kids do. Let me see, that's not really showing up real well. So
Here, you put it down, I can open it up.
Well, this page here that I'm talking about. So starting in level 3, we use the 101 stories from the Bible, and they are copying that image. Again, that opens up new pathways in the brain, attention to detail. They're actually interacting with images, and that's developing hand-eye coordination, but also a deeper attention to the details. Now, I'm not artistic at all, and I'm a bit perfectionistic. No, I can't talk today. Perfectionistic. So my youngest child is actually a lot like me, and he's the same way. He doesn't have a lot of natural artistic ability, but what I do with him is I narrow it. I have him pick one element from the picture. Now he's having to study it, and he's going to gravitate to the easiest thing to draw, and that's okay, because he's still looking at the details as he's trying to decide what he's going to draw. And then just that one element, he's paying attention to details. And so he is painting a story through his drawing, and he's connecting with that picture, so that later when he's telling a story, he can put these pictures to words that he has in his mind. He can draw from the details. So here's an example. Maybe he's telling a story and it has sheep in it. Well, he may, in the reset, the brain is just amazing in how it works. Well, if one of the stories that he has drawn or he has studied had a sheep in it, the brain is going to go back to the details that he saw in those pictures And he is a lot more inclined to pull those details to include in his story.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are the things that we are filling the brain with. We're looking at visual pictures to help them be able to paint pictures with their words.
So a lot of the series is actually, in a way, it's not just learning the components of grammar. You're also you're training the brain how to, well, you're training the brain how to access information.
Yes.
So we have a special needs son who has problems with this. He can fill a file cabinet full of information in his brain, but he can't access it.
Right.
And so, or certain files are unavailable. And so that's a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But this program is really teaching them, when I'm communicating, how to go in, grab past experiences, past patterns, past words and things like that, and then bring it forward into my communication.
Right. And this is also why there's things like learning synonyms, antonyms, homophones, those sorts of things. Some of these things are, you know, you might say, well, what difference does it make to understand all these different types of words? And the reason it makes a difference is because we're filling their toolbox with tools that they can draw from later when they're writing something.
Mm-hmm.
And they're developing an understanding of how the English language is used and applied, so that when they're going to write, they have that in their bank to draw from. And kids love to be witty.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the homonyms, the homophones, and the something else. There's 3 of them. Sorry. Again, I'm very tired. They have that to draw from, to use wit in their writing.
Right.
And to be creative. And so same with synonyms and antonyms and how to use that. The reason that we teach alphabetizing is for that same purpose, so that they can grab a book, they can find a word if they're struggling, because sometimes, you know, you're looking for that one word and you just can't quite think of a word that expresses what you're trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so by teaching some of these nuts and bolts, we're giving them tools to use when they actually sit down and write. Another thing that's built into the program, and again across the board, is verbal activities. And so it's really important for kids to be able to tell their story before they're expected to write it. They need to develop, they might not need to do that all the way on up, but to begin to be able to put something to paper. A lot of kids, yes, homographs, thank you, Anna. A lot of kids struggle to have these thoughts floating around in their mind and then getting them to paper without first telling the story. And this can be a little bit of a stumbling block for kids, even getting it from thoughts in their minds out into a story that they tell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the parent is the gentle guide in the communication. And so what a parent wants to do is, if a kid struggles to actually tell a story, is to start having a conversation about a topic. Mm-hmm. And leading them through in a discussion, and then recapping it in a story form for the student, and saying to them, okay, so the story that I hear you telling is this.
Right. And
actually walking them through the process so that they understand the process. Then they can own it. Then they can develop the skills. And mm-hmm. So you can actually have them retell them that story. So you start off with a discussion. So let's see, it wants us to tell a story about a dog. Do you have a dog? I'm asking you, do you have a dog?
I have dogs, yes.
Can you tell me some things? Can you pick one of your dogs and tell me some things about it?
One of my dogs is big.
Mm-hmm.
She's beautiful, but she's smelly. And she gets on your nerves.
Okay, so tell me about a day that she got on your nerves.
Not on my nerves, on your nerves.
Oh, on my nerves. Yeah. Tell me about a day that she got on my nerves.
It was a beautiful sunny day. And you were working, and she went through your flowers and took all your flower pots and dragged them out into the lawn and destroyed your flowers.
Okay, so this is the process. So he just told me a story about this dog that did something that upset me. And so now if I ask him some details, well, what do you think the dog did first?
She looked to see where we were.
Yeah, you're right. And then what did she do?
She started pulling apart the flowers. This is a two-time Aubrey's calling twice in the same thing. That's funny.
So by asking you these things, we're drawing out details of the story of the dog. Just in this little bit of time, we're already developing a story. And so this is what you're going to do with your child. You're going to draw some of these details out. Then what I would do is I would recap the story. I would say, okay, so first Annie did this, and then she did that, and then this is what happened. And in the end, this is what happened. And so then I would recap the story, and then I would say to you, is there anything else about the story you think we should include? And then I might, if the kid was really struggling, I would probably end it there and then see if they can,
You talk about also like how you want the reader to perceive, or not the reader, but the other person.
Well, not for the kid that's struggling. For the kid that's struggling, it's just getting the story out verbally. If you want to, then you can write it down for them. And then the next time, do a little less discussion of the story and ask them to retell it to you. Tell me what, and you can lead them through it. If they're struggling, you can say, well, what would happen first in this story? What would happen second? Then what would that cause? And so you can give leading questions. And so every time you get together to write something for the kid that's struggling to get something on paper, you're just going to get them to tell a little bit more, and you're going to write it down for them to begin with. But once they're able to start telling those stories on their own, then they can start writing it down. Now, some kids are just going to jump into it naturally, and you're going to have to say, okay, you told me quite a bit. How are we going to condense that down to a paragraph? What's the most important first thing that happened?
Right.
And so you're going to want to shave down some of it. Like the one that's like him, he can come up with stories that take an hour to tell. And so, in his case, I have to do the absolute opposite. Okay, we need to condense this down and leave out some of these details that don't matter. And so in that case, the questions that I ask are different. In that case, I say, can we tell this story without including that part of it or that information?
Right.
Will the story still be effective? Will they still know everything they need to know? And so teaching him how to leave out some of those details while he's telling his story. And so we want to go through that process with a kid like that before they start writing it down. So eventually they get so that they can sit down and they can just write out their story without having to tell it. But for a kid that's facing a new type of activity that is struggling, you may have to work with them and do some of the actual writing and helping them with the expressive process.
Okay, so just for the teacher, right? Because I'm looking at some of the comments. Something that I think is really important. Scripture says power of life and death is in the tongue. That we actually have the power to bless, we have the power to curse. And learning the importance of our word and word choices, learning how to communicate, because in a lot of ways, conversations almost have flavors or colors that you can almost like, there's a certain feeling when a child communicates. And a lot of times we approach language and writing and these things as just a subject to be done. We don't realize that what we're actually training our children is we're giving them a sword. We're giving them a very powerful weapon. With that weapon, they can defend and they can attack. They can provide sustenance or they can kill. And so in this process, as a parent educator, you're not just teaching them the foundations of how to write a sentence. You're teaching them how to wield this powerful weapon in their life. So first, by learning to describe, and even when they come into the room and they tattle or they're being nasty, a good time to kind of point out and say, let's think about what just happened.
Is there a better way you could have told me the exact same thing?
Yeah, how can we build up? How can we encourage? How do we start? And even certain understanding, like if I say Orange County Choppers, automatically, or Hell's Angels, your mind goes to a certain place. If I say Martha Stewart, your mind goes to another place. If I say Chip and what's her name? Gaines, the Magnolia people, your mind goes to another place of linen sheets and country farms and remodel. I mean, all of these things, and teaching our kids that they have the power when they communicate to take people places, to paint pictures for people to help inspire them or tear them down.
Right.
Once they begin experiencing the power of what they have, then teaching them the power of the written word. And the power of the written word, like everything we say today, is captured by a video. But if we were having a conversation, those words are lost forever and they're only going to be perceived. When I actually take the time to sit down and write out my thoughts and do it in a way that communicates intelligently, that has
it's powerful in the way that God designed us, in the way that our brain processes the written word.
Right.
It's very powerful.
And that was actually, the written word was, the mission here was ink on paper to impact eternity, and the power of the written word to inspire people. One of our main things, our life mission of supporting the homeschool movement, is to see children become communicators of the gospel, communicators of the hope of Jesus Christ. They can't do that without proper training. And part of that is also being able to communicate. It's not just about writing sentences.
No, absolutely not.
It's not about nouns and verbs and adjectives. It's about how to learn how to work this weapon that is so powerful. People who can communicate can change the world, right? And never before have these kids had the opportunity to reach the masses. I mean, we're doing a video that will probably be seen by 2,000 to 3,000 people and have 500 comments. A lot of it is written word.
Right.
And it's incredible what opportunities we have, and good communicators will rise.
Yes.
Okay. So that was my mini message.
So I want to go back because Richard Shannon D says, our son doesn't have a problem verbally, but if you ask him to write it instead, he's completely stuck. He gets very upset and irritated because he has a hard time getting it on paper. That is another hurdle that the mind has to cross. Now you're talking hand-eye coordination, you're talking stamina. Of course, there are kids that have some writing issues and things like that. But barring that, what we want to do in those cases is, again, ease them in gently. You write some of it. Help model the process of actually getting those things onto paper. So what we can say is, well, what's the first thing we want to write about our story? What sentence? So just focus on that very first sentence. And even if you have to physically write it down for the first time or two, that's okay. And then as you're going to gradually put that responsibility over to him. So the next time you get together, maybe you have him write the first sentence. And so you talk through together what that first sentence should say. And maybe even you write it and he copies it. So you become the teacher, in that you have to step into the role of teacher. And that's a little something too that I would like to address, is that every school out there, whether you're talking public school, private school, or homeschool, has some sort of curriculum in their school. But yet all schools have teachers. And what that tells me is that curriculum isn't the teacher.
It's tools.
Curriculum is your tool. And so when we get asked, is something enough? Well, no, it doesn't replace a teacher. No curriculum is going to be enough. And that's because
there are better tools.
There are better tools. Yes, you can get better tools.
Not the master books, but there are better tools.
But you still have to apply those, this language lesson series. Every person who orders language lessons 4 is going to get the exact same book, but they're not going to put them into the hands of the exact same child, even within a family. And so you have to take the tool of the curriculum and apply it to the individual child that meets their needs. That's the role of a teacher. Mm-hmm. And so when I am working through, okay, so my son started language lessons 4. He really probably should have gone back to the beginning of 3, to be honest. But he was so excited about level 4, he cried waiting for it. And so I didn't have the heart to put him back into 3 because it would have devastated him. And that would have had a worse effect than the extra time that I have to spend to kind of catch him up on some of the things.
Right.
So
if you're going to do top down, I'll do it. I'll switch from here.
Okay. So one of the things what we started off with subjects and predicates. And so I had to take some time and review subject and predicate with him. And so for another kid, I wouldn't have had to do that, but he needed that review and he needed that discussion. And I spent some time underlining the subject, talking about the subject, talking about the predicate. And so we worked through that lesson very much together, mm-hmm. even though for some students it could have been an independent lesson. And so there's other things in there that he just gets and he doesn't need help with. When it comes to any of the sight words, forget it. He's such an advanced reader and such an advanced communicator that I don't need to have him do anything with the sight words. I say, okay, read them, make sure you know them all. Even the spelling comes really easy to him. And so we just go through and focus on any words that are problematic for him rather than focusing on the entire list. He still does the spelling activities. His favorite is to create the word searches for me to complete, and then he adds extra words to the list for me to find as well.
Can I, on the person whose student is having a hard time writing, can I encourage you to reward the behavior that you want? Mm-hmm. So for me, I was not a sparkler, but I remember it was 3rd grade. I drew a picture of an Army plane, and the teacher asked me if I would write a story about the picture I just drew. And it was a simple story. I'm sure it was very 3rd grade-ish, but she made a huge deal about it. And she actually took that story and the picture and she put it on construction paper and she taped it to her desk. And I can still remember the impact that had.
Yes.
I forward up to 7th grade. I wrote another story, and the principal, who really didn't like me at all, did take time to say, you have a gift in writing. And if you develop that gift, you can use that to your advantage. Those 2 things were pivotal in my life in making me want to learn how to write better and write.
Yeah.
So with your student, look for a place that you can connect. If he writes a sentence, show it to dad and say, hey, look at what he did today. This is an awesome sentence. And if dad doesn't encourage him, smack him in the back of the head and say, no, look what he did, right? You gotta celebrate the win with this, because we like being rewarded, and we like somebody pointing out and saying, wow, you're pretty special when it comes to this. Mm-hmm. So, don't focus on how poorly they write. Just focus on the good parts. That's one of the things I like about Writing Strands, is he really encourages the parent to we can always say, hey, we can make it a little better if we do this, but celebrate the good part first in that way. Because if you're a perfectionist and you can't write a perfect paper and the only thing that happens is we point out the negative.
Yeah, and we didn't finish that conversation back with the picture that my son really hates to draw because he's a perfectionist like I am, and mm-hmm. I understand that. And so we've had a lot of, there's actually 3 of us in the family that really are not gifted in the ability to draw very well. And so that's okay. We have had a lot of discussions about it's okay to not be perfect. This is room for growth. And you may never be able to draw as good as what you see in this picture. And that's okay. What we want is we want to keep working at it, that there is actual benefit in doing it, even if we can't do it perfectly. And so now he's good with just drawing one part of it. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like we have accomplished that much through encouragement, instead of me, and I don't ever pick apart his drawing. I never tell him how he can improve it, because that particular student, the fact that he's even doing the exercise at all is a huge accomplishment. And so,
but he's gotten
better
and
at
he's
it.
He's starting to take pride in what he's doing.
Yes.
So
yes. Yeah. And so just having those discussions about we're learning this, and so it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay. It's about making progress. And I've also reminded him, remember what it was like the first time that you were trying to ride your bike and you were so frustrated and you were in tears because you couldn't ride your bike the instant you got on it. It's the same here.
I heard this morning. Practice is controlled failure. Mm-hmm. That's pretty profound. I just that's why we practice. It's controlled failure. Yeah. We learn from failure.
And so these series actually becomes, as they're working through the language lessons, opportunities for some really good discussions that apply to all of life and not just language arts.
Yes. And it is, so as a teacher, approach it a little bit more like you're a person who's handing this powerful tool to your child, and you're beginning to train them for a life, right, of using mm-hmm. this. So, okay, so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to switch over.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you, because we go on.
And I have an appointment
so let's do this.
Noon.
Okay, so we have 3 lessons. What I want is the overview. We're going to fill it in. There'll be a book 1 will be by the end of the year. Book 5 is already written. It's just in the house and got to be laid out and designed and all of that.
It'll still be a summer release.
And then 6 will be coming out as well. But right now we have these 3. A student who goes into level 2, at the end of this, what will they be able to write?
They should be pretty confident at writing 3 sentences. Confidence, stamina, and all of that. They should be able to handle doing 3 sentences a day. Now, one of the things that I want to also reiterate is in the back of the book, there's lots of extra practice, lots of extra games and all of that. But something that's really important that's in the back of the book, especially as you progress through, is the grammar study sheets. And a student should always have access to the grammar study sheets, even when they're completing reviews and all of that. And the thought behind that is that we want to teach our kids how to get information if you're not sure of something. And so grammar is something that is repeated every single year because kids struggle with learning it and remembering it and retaining it. How many times I've had a 4th or 5th grader say, "Oh, what's an adjective again?" And understanding the difference between nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, they're still, if they haven't done it in a little bit, it's easily forgotten. And so we want them to have that access even when they're doing a review, because what it does is it sets the pattern up. If I'm not sure of something, I can look it up, because that's what we do nowadays. I think it was with the moderators, we were talking about how when we were kids, they used to say, well, you're not going to have a calculator with you everywhere you go when you grow up. Well, were they ever wrong? Because I do. I have a calculator with me everywhere I go. And so that's the same thing with some of these grammar concepts. You know, we have our Google, we have our powerhouse with us everywhere we go. And so we really want to develop the habit of looking for the information when we need it.
Okay, book 2.
So book 2 takes them from writing 3 sentences into writing a paragraph. And so by the end of this, they're going to be able to construct a full paragraph.
Okay. And book 4.
Book 4 is honing in on their writing skills. It's honing in on writing better sentences and writing better paragraphs. And we're going to kind of hang out in paragraphs for levels 4 and 5 to really get the underpinnings of that. And really, we won't go into writing a couple of paragraphs at a time until level 6.
Okay. So I'm zooming in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So paragraph writing.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it has the daily schedule in the beginning.
Yeah.
And then the exercises. Now, is it pretty much, we know it also uses this book.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is part of the series.
Right.
Okay.
Through level 5, you're going to be using that
one. Okay. So the different types of sentences.
Mm-hmm. We're still reviewing a lot of the things. We don't go into it as in depth in the teaching of it, but it still teaches it.
Okay. What I'd like to do with you is spelling is an issue that comes up often.
Yes.
We don't have a lot of time today to address it. I'd like to do a special segment on spelling.
Sure.
Okay. Because spelling is everywhere, but would you say a basic spelling?
I wouldn't say it's a basic spelling, but I didn't go with words that were going to discourage the student. And when it comes to spelling, there is no one size fits all. I believe that in the lower grades, spelling is important, but not as important as what we tend to give it, especially for kids that just are not good at spelling. There's a pretty high probability that student, no matter what you use, is going to struggle with spelling their whole life, and they're going to basically graduate to an electronic device that they can either look it up or it corrects their spelling for them.
This doesn't have a separate teacher guide. Teacher notes are in the text.
Yes.
So you can look at the notes to see what needs to happen. Again, there's picture studies. There's so much going on right now with brain science and persuasion, and I think that this could be so developed in high school as well, because we just don't realize how much of it's happening around us. So they have the grammar practice.
Yes, this is the last level that has sight words.
Okay. Perforation, 3-hole punched, so you can tear out the sheets and hand to the student.
I actually tore mine out, and I have to say the perfs were amazing.
Yeah, Tim's worked really hard.
I turned out the answer key in mine, and it was just phenomenal.
Tim's worked really hard to increase. The paper is a heavier paper.
Right.
The perfs are higher.
That's why it's such a thick book.
You still have the stories.
We still have the stories. You'll notice the difference is we don't have the highlighted sections anymore. At this level, most students should be able to read the entire story. If your student is still struggling with reading some, then you can still co-read and pick out what sentences they're going to read. But at this level, they should be capable of reading the whole story.
There's a lot of critical thinking and development. Again, the toolbox, using the toolbox, teaching children to access information and bring it out.
And organize it. It's all part of, when you see, now we have the just for fun, and these are just for fun, but they were selected with brain development in mind. And so all of these activities help a student make connections and to organize information, which is really important for the writing process.
Okay. I'm just going to go a little bit further back. So they're learning basic communication. The scope and sequence would still be very much on par with what you would see in BJU, Abeka, those programs.
Yes, they're still learning, punctuation, grammar,
but
skills.
Designed in a way that is shorter lessons,
right.
Content in context,
right.
A lot of
application,
growth development, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. What?
Nothing. There's a conversation happening outside my door, so I was listening to it.
I know. Pay attention to what you're doing, because I got to get home.
I am. All right. So as we go through, and then in the back, we have some extra.
Yeah, as always, the games are tailored to.
Oh, it's still the dictionary?
Still the dictionary. all of the great stuff in the back. Your, different way to assess if you want a different way other than using the reviews. You still have your independent reading lists, and all that great stuff is still back there. And all the activities and games, which I always go through and make adjustments. I add in if there's been new information. We might add a whole different game, or we might make adjustments to the variations to include things like, in this one we added the paragraph sandwich game. The spelling practice, all your spelling words are in there. Extra copy work, and then it goes into your grammar study sheets. And so the grammar study sheets is building upon building upon building, and so we're constantly adding more to those grammar study sheets, and then the answer key in the back.
Okay. So I know from using information, it takes up to 17, 20 times for a student to actually use information for it to go into long-term memory.
Yes.
A lot of this, again, is overviews.
Mm-hmm.
It's designed to introduce them to it. They're going to come back to it. They're going to come back to it. They're going to come back to it and build on that.
And that's where when somebody says my kid isn't retaining it, they're at the review and they're not retaining it. I'm not really expecting the kids to retain a lot of the grammar and a lot of that stuff, which is why we have the reviews so often, and why the last quarter is a review of everything that they've learned.
Yep.
Because they need that constant repetition. But the problem with constant repetition is it gets boring after a while. And so it's striking that balance of having review but not making it boring. And when it comes to this stuff, every language arts curriculum reviews everything every single year. And there's a reason for that. And it's because it takes that long for the kids to actually learn it and make it a part of their common knowledge that they just know. Like, at what point do you just know what a noun is and nobody has to teach it to you any longer?
Right.
Well, that takes a lot of repetition and a lot of working with it. And so that's why there's so much review built in. And that's why we still continue to review every single year. And that's because these kids do struggle with retaining it. It just takes more interaction for kids to get these concepts, and that's okay. So, and it's also why they should always be given access to those grammar study sheets so that they're trained. Well, I can't remember what a noun is, but I can look it up.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's what a noun is. And so as far as the kid having instant retention, I think that's a little too much to ask. And it's also what brings about the tears and the hate for language arts, is because we push them too hard and too fast, and it destroys their love of communication, which is really a shame and not what I'm going for at all.
Yes. Okay. I kept you too long. I appreciate you joining me today. Be sure to post questions that you have, and we'll be watching to answer any questions that are available. Be sure also to comment for a chance to have 2,500 reward points added to your account. And we thank you. We pray a blessing on your homeschool. I pray a blessing on your teaching of communication so that your children will be able to communicate the hope of God's Son, Jesus Christ, to their generation. All right?
Well said.
Thank you. All right, guys. God bless you.